Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today for another in our series of data governance and compliance. Hope you've enjoyed the previous ones and our discussions so far. Today, we're going to be looking at solving complex data for regulatory compliance. Secure and exploit it, any type of data, any type of regulatory data, anywhere, anytime. Jeremy, our head of strategy, will be taking us through this. We'll then have a Q&A at the end of the session. So please submit your questions using the tab. I believe it's on the left. If you've got any comments, if you've got any suggestions of what you'd like to see in the future as well, please do let us know. We'd be happy to look at those. If we can't get to your questions at the end for whatever reason, then we'll make sure that one of us or one of our expert team follows up with you. So without further ado, Jeremy, I will hand it over to you.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much for joining this webinar, or if you're seeing it later, for spending the time to listen to us. So this is about 3 weeks ago, we did a first in a series on governance, risk and compliance. This is the second, which is taking a look at the regulatory compliance data requirements. And obviously a very topical subject. We've had quite a stormy week in financial services. I'm not suggesting for a minute that it was a failure of compliance to cause banks to collapse. That's the market. What we do know for sure is that compliance and the regulations were undoubtedly going to change, because it's, you know, an important aspect is when bad things happen, new rules are invented, new processes are demanded, new reports have to happen. And that's of course the same for when big banks fail. It's the same if chemical factories blow up. Or mines collapse, we get changes in regulation. When drugs or substances are proven to cause actual harm, we get changes in regulation. And the change is important. I mean, it's socially responsible. We could also say the regulations are put there in order to, you know, impose lessons learned from bad things. But equally, this change, and we'll look at this in a little more detail, but equally we know that reflecting change in our traditional data systems is very slow and very expensive. And so what we're going to do today is just take a little look at the way that MarkLogic, with its single unified data platform, actually has a different approach, which provides data agility and allows business to respond and business data systems to respond rapidly to change. My focus today is on regulatory compliance, but it is relevant to all regulated industries, and what we'll talk about in a little bit while is not just regulated industries either, because regulatory happens inside organizations wherever they are. So let's look at an extraordinary statistic I dug up when I was putting this together. It comes from the World Bank, that economies spend the equivalent of 8% of their gross national product on regulatory compliance annually. And we're not here talking, and that number just refers to the actual burden of statutory regulatory compliance. It doesn't concern what we might call the internal to any organization compliance, which would make this percentage higher. And so there's a massive cost and efficiency burden on being compliant, on making sure we stick to the regulations. And of course, if there's anything we can do to bring down these sorts of numbers, it's genuinely balance sheet changing for any organization that gets it right. So let's talk about reducing complexity and increasing agility. And MarkLogic and its data platform is all about providing data agility and reducing complexity. But if we start looking specifically at the compliance field, right? Let's just start with general sort of principles, axioms, if you like, of digital acceleration and the move to the cloud is a transformational opportunity for all companies. That's pretty standard, and many of us are going through digital transformation or digital acceleration projects. I think when we're looking at larger companies, it comes also with a mandate to simplify expensive and increasingly complex data ecosystems. If we fail to reduce this complexity, we end up with excessive costs, lost opportunity, increased vulnerabilities, security risks, and vendor dependence. So firms, and particularly in regulated industries, operate under rigorous and ever-changing and ever-increasing compliance requirements from multiple regimes. For example, in financial services, we are determined by factors such as the instrument, the customer, the location, the geopolitical climate, and increasingly we see that compliance, whether it's financial services or any large global organization in a regulatory environment, it's cross-border and needs to be joined up. And responding to this regulatory oversight is mandatory. Choosing the right environment that is secure, cost-efficient, and agile delivers genuine competitive advantage compared to those companies that make the wrong decision. When we look at the data, all companies have various data silos and provider sources from multiple vendors supporting many different data types. And it is, we think, very true that it's the application first approach which has over time led to extreme integration complexity and an acute inability to respond quickly to business change due to the fragmented and the disparate nature of the data resources. The effect has been to gradually mark down data's quality, its value, its completeness, its security, its unity and trustworthiness. In this whole series of webinars, we've been looking very much at showing how taking a data platform approach, where we're taking data as a supply chain and putting data first with the applications underneath, that we're able to provide a completely different way of working with data that is hugely agile, much more efficient and much less costly and much more capable of responding quickly to change. That concept we call data agility. So we're going to be talking about regulations and more regulations. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, but very obvious, insurance and banking, they have, these are all examples. This is definitely not a definitive list. But everything from KYC to anti-money laundering, via MiFID II, you go into healthcare and life sciences, IDMP in pharmaceuticals, real-world evidence, adverse event reporting. If you're in heavy asset servicing, so that's servicing of big equipment. You could call an oil field a piece of big equipment, if you like. We're talking about a very different set of regulations when we're in high-tech manufacturing. Obviously export control if you're in any in protected technology, or chemical waste disposal. The list goes on, and of course there are very strong global regulations like traditional PII covered by GDPR and things like that, health information, and that goes on. So that's just 5 regulated industries, and there's a long list of regulated industries, all of whom have their own set of acronyms, and their own set of mandated requirements for regulatory reporting and from compliance, everything from energy through to trade. The thing that's common is that these may be different industries, and they think they have different needs, and they do, because they have different if you like, exposures to different elements of a regulation, and the regulations are different. But in whole, they all need to connect, create, and consume complex data. And which is what the MarkLogic data platform is so good at. And they may have different needs, but they're all subject to the same process and approach. So if you like, there's an uber high-level concept around regulatory data processing, which is the need to support specific business activities. And there are 5 very broad ones. I'm sure, and please write if you can find another one, but at a very, very broad level, we're talking about data and records management and retention, because we need to be able to prove things that we need to prove when asked the question. We need to be sure that we're compliant. And we, of course, as a business, we need to be compliant anyway, because we don't want to forget the lessons learned that caused the regulations in the first place. We then have to go through whole cycles of statutory reporting that happen at different phases and timings, but there's always that side to it. We are constantly looking at risk and process analytics. If we're if we're looking at our data in order to make sure we're anticipating any potential breach, that we're looking at how we might improve and all that stuff. We then have, if we do find ourselves on the wrong side, of course, we have both internal and external investigations to support. And if it then gets challenged, we have to provide evidence-based legal defense. So regulations, regardless of industry, different needs, same process, and the data behind it, we need to be able to connect, create, consume complex data. Here's a simple, and I'm not really going to go through this very heavy slide, but here's some examples in financial reporting, financial regulatory landscape. It's a complicated reporting environment. It's going to be exactly the same. A similar slide I could draw up for pharmaceuticals and life sciences, for healthcare, for any of those regulated industries. And it is no wonder expensive to maintain. And it is also, and I'll start with my starting point being, is also subject to change regularly. And we'll come to how often, but it's an important aspect, which is change being difficult to implement in our sort of brittle traditional data ecosystem, which is integration centric and consequently very difficult to change. Change is one of the things that happens in regulatory and the financial regulatory landscape often. So let's look at the regulatory technology and talk a little bit about how regulation reform requires technology change. I think, regulatory compliance clearly gives rise to business priorities that ultimately shape technology decisions. It's a business requirement, and technology is there to support it. So all firms have to prioritize their technology choices based on trade-offs and risk assessment. We know, and all firms know, that they're regularly non-compliant in many areas, and and the answer to that is to adopt a reactive approach to breach management. This gives a rise to unscalable, disparate technology platforms. We've seen that over the time, such as data lakes and in-house platforms, which are often implemented around business silos to meet deadlines. My point today would be to take a platform approach, and we'll go into that a little bit later. And then when we look at replacing manual processes, to demonstrate that we are actually reaching the appropriate levels of controls to regulators, our technical deficiencies and gaps in control are papered over with manual processes. We know we know that. We all know that, and we know that that leads to operational efficiency. So there's both inefficiencies in our traditional way of working with regulatory processes, but there's also that's a cost element, but there's also every time you want adds in or has to do an extra manual process, we're also talking about data quality. And if we go back to the last presentation, we were talking a lot about data governance and data quality in that. So it's not just money, it's also quality, and poor data quality leads to poor decisions, which sort of certainly harms the ability to explain later why we became non-compliant. Clearly, cloud infrastructure has the potential to deliver the improvements and efficiencies demanded through automation, scalability, business continuity, and security at a much reduced cost. And the regulatory reform programs are good checkpoints to revisit existing technology infrastructure strategy and whether the strategy is fit for purpose. My basic hypothesis today is that we advise a platform approach. We advise a data platform that can handle the needs of evolving requirements and not make the traditional application silos worse. In fact, at MarkLogic, we're doing the opposite. It's a platform approach which eliminates silos. So the regulatory data is a catalyst for change, right? They change, and is a catalyst for technology change or an approach change of the approach. And the nice, you could say if there's anything nice about regulations, they're highly thematic. Compliance dates are written into the regulations, and any change is flagged with a long notice period. So it allows you to plan in a new approach. And the dates are typically, 12 to 8 months after publication of regulation, and all companies who are affected by them await these official go-live dates. And whether one's in banking, pharma, manufacturing, defense, government, right? These are quite well-planned regulatory changes, which gives one time to say, oh, you know what, I think I'm going to take this platform approach because we know these changes are coming. And that's certainly long enough to get a really good platform approach in. And we'll talk about some of the more modern data architectures in a little while. What we also know is that program funding is readily accessible, and it tends to come from non-discretionary budget pools. So if one can hook into a regulatory data platform, the MarkLogic one is what we're talking about today, it is a way possibly of getting the platform in which can be used in many other use cases, because you don't not do regulatory reporting, and you don't not implement the changes when you need to, and that potentially is a way to take a look at a platform approach as opposed to the old way of working, which is the integration-centric, application-centric approach. We know that firms have to run these regulatory implementations concurrently. They demand on resources extensive and sustained. We also know that a failure to deliver often results in a huge manual effort to remediate any technical deficit and paper over the breaches. We know that regulations are naturally evergreening for the reasons I've given you, and by that I don't see that as a good thing. It's expensive to permanently think you've got to evergreen your regulatory data ecosystem when a platform should evolve over, to take care of the change without having to completely replace the massive investments and evergreen something with a new one. So it's expensive, it takes time, right? And there is a better way. I've used this slide, I think, throughout the series, but it's worth a repeat. What is the MarkLogic data platform? Well, how does it work, or how? By coupling all and any data with everything that's known about that data, as well as what it means. So we offer this data service as a single data platform delivered by a single vendor. It's used to simplify the solving of complex data problems. And compliance is maybe the most complex data problem because of the very many aspects, and we'll look at some of those requirements in a little while. But the ability to connect any data of any application, of any architecture, of any workflow, then create and interpret that data, and then consume that data through informed search or contextual applications or grounded data for analytics or facts-based intelligence is equally relevant for compliance and regulatory processing and reporting as it is for other things. And that's why I say that the data platform can be used in many different use cases. Clearly today we're talking about regulatory. If you followed the series, you've seen this before, but I think it's worth drawing out a couple of aspects. It's a single unified data platform. It's made up of two foundational technologies, a multi-model database and semantic AI. In addition to that, there are basically 6 technical implementation patterns or architectures: data catalog, data fabric, data hub, metadata management, data and text analytics. Those are the 6 ways that the platform can exhibit itself, or as a mix of them. Ultimately, the software and the platform is designed as middleware that fits and works alongside your existing data ecosystems, but it is adding this capability of being able to see your data as a supply chain. 2 important outcomes for this conversation are, auditable compliance, and I say auditable because one needs to be able to justify the compliance decisions one took, and support these decisions of consequence that make a big difference, potentially to the balance sheet of your company, potentially to the reputation of your company, potentially to the profitability of your company. And we saw right at the beginning the amount of money that the world spends on going through this regulatory process. Moving it a few bits makes a huge difference to many companies. So I've talked about data as a supply chain. Here, again, using financial services as an example, I happen to know it very well. It's my background, so I can talk about it quite. I'm not a chemist, I'm not in pharmaceuticals, I'm not a doctor, so healthcare comes to me a little less keenly, not manufacturing. But here, let's look at what this data supply chain looks like. When we talk about the connection, we think about all the different things in a financial services supply chain that we might need to have at our disposal to be able to be compliant. Contracts, statements, advices, tax documentation, personal corporate documents, statutory returns, the data that's in your operational data marks and lakes, geolocation and jurisdiction data, trade data, and application data, temporal state data, and semantic models. They're all part of, and they're all the data assets that you have to, in order to be compliant, bring together and see in holistically as a whole, right? So that one can then create a single enriched trusted source of regulatory data and what it means, ready for immediate action. And whilst we're doing creating that single enriched trusted source, we need to interpret that data through the lens of the regulation. We need to put the data into context. We need to, at its foundation, govern it so that we know where it came from. And everything we talked about last week or 3 weeks ago. We need high quality data. We need data unity brought together, regardless of its species or its type. And it has to be, really well locked down because it is fundamental data to the enterprise. And then once we've created and then we can interpret that data, we need to consume it. And we need to consume it as quality contextual data. And the supply chain concept is iterative. So, as we move through our business processes, we're repeating connect, create, consume, and then we're going around and we're orchestrating the data for the particular, if you like, value-added input of an additional interpretation or an additional connection, so that we can consume as data flows through its pipeline, if you like, or its supply chain. It is permanently and constantly enriched, often in an active way. So the MarkLogic solution to this is solving this data complexity, and we looked at some of the very many different species that all come to bear in a regulatory compliance process. And we want to eliminate the effect of silos, which is preventing the reflection of change, which is foundational, if you like, to the idea of compliance and regulation. So what have we got? We've got a single unified data platform, one place to go for data and everything you know about that data. We've got a choice of implementations. We can implement it as a data fabric or as an aggregating data hub, and that's what I'm showing in the pictures down below, where, if it's a greenfield architecture, and typically one wants to implement a data fabric. But if it's a brownfield architecture, you want to, on top of your existing ecosystem of existing regulatory applications and container, you want to be able to put the data hub architecture. So regardless of how we're doing it, we're giving a single data answer for all regulatory processing, reporting, investigation, analysis, and forensic investigation. And we're augmenting the existing investment in data systems. There's no rip and replace, right? We don't always get, and very rarely do we get, greenfield architectures, but change happens. And there may be a case for that if your systems are very old and you want to start from scratch and you want to start again and maybe leapfrog a generation of approaches. But if you have existing systems, as we all do, and they're all sort of working and they're just a bit inefficient and take long to change, then the data hub architecture is a better, more of a brownfield. So let's come to dive into some regulatory data requirements. I've talked about data unity, but this is about being able to see data at 360, regardless of its type, its species, right? So just because I've got a research piece of research information in a report doesn't mean I don't need to connect that report with the research systems. That's research data that's sitting in a traditional database in order to see it as a whole. Clearly, I need to universally connect, link, store, and ingest any data, right? We want to try and eliminate silos, and so we have to have a universal connection, right? We need to be able to put that data to immediate use. We don't want to have to do, for example, extract, transform, and load that takes ages. That takes years to sort out. We want to be able to immediately use that data, right? We need an information time machine. Why? Because we need to be able to explain what that data looked like. What do we know at a certain point in time when a decision was made using the data? So we need to be able to jump back in time and show to a regulator or an internal compliance officer what we knew at a particular point. We need data governance at the core, because governance is all about certainty and trustworthiness of the data in the first place, and not have that as a separate application that's just integrated in, creating another silo. Governance is its core. We need relationship and business concept management. If I'm in banking, I need to have people are connected to companies, are connected to, lists of bad actors. If I'm in pharmaceuticals, molecules are connected to particular drugs, which have connected to certain conditions, as an example. So we actually have this idea, and it comes very much down to graph, where relationships and how relationships and business concepts relate to other relationships and other business concepts, a very semantic approach to right inside our regulatory data. And when we've got our data, put it to use, joined up its relationship, sorted all that stuff out, we need everything that and clearly we're using some AI because there's so much data, you couldn't not automate the process. We need to have everything to be auditable, repeatable, and transparent, so that when we have to talk to a judge, or God, forbid, when we get to a defense, having to defend our decisions in court 5 years after the event, we can show how the data went through its supply chain and how it was transparent, what decisions it made, how it can be repeatable 5 years later using the data at the time, and how it was audited at the time. We have to wrap this all up with transformational data security. We have to put our data in context to the regulation. We need to be able to orchestrate our data, and we will clearly need to support investigation, analysis, reporting, applications, and operations. So those are the data requirements, and that's why my challenge is it's very complex data, many different species, and very much a lot to think about, all of which, of course, is supplied by the data platform. When we take the idea of data unity, we're talking essentially about the multi-model aspects of MarkLogic. We're talking about managing document, relational, temporal, geospatial, and graph in a single platform. When we talk about universal connectivity, we're talking about connecting, storing, and ingesting any data of any type from anywhere, of any volume, at any speed. When we talk about our data time machine, we're talking about proving what we knew and when you knew it. Technically, we call it bitemporal. When we talk about data governance at its core, we're talking about the lineage, provenance, and the traceability throughout the data lifecycle. When we talk about audible, repeatable, that's what we mean. It's transparent, trustworthy AI. When we talk about transformational data security, we're talking about a very profound interpretation of who can see that data from which geography, based on what attributes you've got and all that stuff, which we're very famous for. When you talk about immediate use of data, we're talking about doing this without massive amounts of ETL and master data management, because we can do all sorts of things within the platform with using the semantics to eliminate that. When we put data in context, we're putting it in context to its security, its governance, its state, its use, and its audience. And when we're talking about contextualizing data, we're putting it in context of the subject in hand for investigation, analytics, reporting, applications, and operations. So that, for me, is the full list of the regulatory data requirements served up by the MarkLogic data platform. And it's ideal as a platform for regulatory compliance, processing, and reporting. So in summary, we're solving complex data for regulatory compliance. We're already doing that for many of our customers. We're solving these complex data challenges where the required storage, management, and extraction of data from and the lineage back to documents of record, which are an important aspect of compliance, is totally ideal for a platform that at its core is multi-model plus search plus semantics. We have proven results in regulatory compliance. We have a very strong reference base. We have a very strong partner base. And the reason why it should matter is compliance activities impact balance sheet and reputation of companies, all companies, but particularly large global companies who work in a regulated environment. Clearly, compliance is a mandatory function, and change to regulation occurs regularly and often. And unless we change the way we're working from an application-centric to a data-centric approach, is only going to get more costly, more expensive, less efficient, and more prone to error. And we have an opportunity to change the way we work with our data by taking a data platform approach.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jeremy. Thanks for that. Like I say, we're going to go for a Q&A, but just before we do, I just wanted to say that we've got a number of other events that are coming up. I know that Jeremy in April is going to be at the Data Architect's Best Practice, the Bright Talk Summit, with his colleague Matthew Gonzalez, the VP of Product Management for MarkLogic, and they're going to be looking at data platform capabilities for modern data management architectures. We've also got coming up in April, at the start of April on the 6th, modernizing data and analytics, delivering data and agility for pharma companies. That's with our with our partner at Burlesoft, along with one of our pharma experts here within MarkLogic. So so those should be two good events. They're both available on our Bright Talk channel now to register for. So so keep an eye out for those. Jeremy, right, let's get to some of the questions that have come through. So okay, we've got, at the beginning, you talked a little about compliance not being just demanded by regulations. Can you sort of talk about and expand on that a bit?
Yeah, I can. Of course I can. I think we, in my mind, compliance is not just about meeting regulations and being fined if you don't, right? It's also about risk. Risk of reputation, risk of exposure to, say, a class action lawsuit or a product recall. You know, when we look at you know, massive, you know, exposure to, say, a motor manufacturer who has to recall 500,000 vehicles, that is as much companies will put in place compliance processes to make sure that their vehicles are safe.
Yeah.
So it's not because necessarily is mandated by a regulator, it's because the company mandates it because it's good business practice to reduce risk. And by doing, and so there are teams of people who go through and help improve the process for whatever it is that you're doing. So many compliance tasks are undertaken and mandated internally. So I'm, you know, if I'm in oil maintenance or car manufacturing, I want to stop bad things from happening.
Yeah.
And as we learn, we tend to change our processes, and actually making sure that we are implementing our new processes is typically make sure that we're doing them is a compliance task. So that's why I was a bit, you know, I see it as a much bigger aspect than just regulatory compliance, which clearly everyone has to do, but clearly companies also want to make sure that they're not at risk.
Yeah, there's that business process compliance as well.
Yeah, it's all about stopping bad things from happening. And if they do happen, let's please not do it again. Right.
Yeah. Okay, so another one here. Why do you think regulatory data is more complex than simple sort of SQL type data?
Because of the many different species that have to be joined up. And by species or data type, I mean, you know, when a judge and there's a case 5 years after an event, they don't say, I want to inspect your data. They will say, I want to see your source record, the contract, whatever it is. So, and data often spins out of contract. So ideally, you want to have, alongside all your transaction systems and your reporting systems, you also want to have your contracts, but not in a separate place. Right? Yeah. So that's one example where the species is a document alongside the species of a SQL row and column to represent something that went on, which would made up one transaction. And when you look at, you know, large enterprises, they do millions of transactions. So you've got millions of these things. Yeah. So it's complex data in the sense that there's multiple species, but also we start to look at, it's very clear that there's a link between, I don't know, standard compliance between, say, an instrument, a financial instrument, the market it's traded on, the risk grading it might have and things. So that is actually a standard relationship model, which suits very much to graph. So now we've got a document, a contract, some transactional data, and we've got a structural relationship between these things, and that suits graph. So now we've got three types of models, right, that need to be stored, and ideally not in three separate databases, because otherwise we're dealing with the silo integration thing.
Yeah.
Well, And then we need a need for this time machine, right? So tell me what we knew 3 years ago at this particular time. I love the MarkLogic biotemporality concept, but I mean, it's not totally unique, but you need it. So having a time machine is very important to compliance. So that adds an extra complexity. Then we actually have to, because we need to know the quality of our data, we actually have to have a governance system in place, data governance, which is often outsourced to a completely separate data governance engine. So now we've got another integration complexity. And then we need the need for external transparency, because people are going to come and inspect, and quite rightly, regulators have an appetite for inspection, right? So we've got to be able to serve all this information up quickly, accurately, with justification. So it isn't, it's complex data. It's not SQL data on its own, which you can say, oh, well, that's fine. Now we'll go off to our records management system, and we'll look at our knowledge graph, and we'll get our governance involved. It's much better to have it all in one place.
Yeah.
It's complex data.
And then let's not forget the metadata around your original data as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, this data as a supply chain sort of demand, does it demand like a wholesale change in what's used within the organization? Is that?
No. It can't. It would never work. No one's going to throw away the billions of dollars of investment in their systems they've built up over the last 30 years. It's just that's not what I'm saying. So it's categoric no. There are some modern architectures, though, modern data architectures that are much more business friendly, which allow you to keep what you've already got, add to the systems that you already have, but actually it changes and I'll go through those architectures, or some of them. It allows you to start, or actually to implement data as a supply chain. And those architectures are a data hub, which is more of an aggregating idea that you may have stuff sitting in a mainframe, you may have stuff sitting in perfectly valid applications, your ERP systems, your CRM systems, or whatever they are. But it's a place where you potentially can either aggregate data in as a cache and use the multi-model for that. And the cache doesn't have to be there for long, or it can be there forever. But it takes some of the load off your traditional systems, which are quite expensive and on-premise, and allows you to implement it. Or as a data fabric, which is a much more interwoven, possibly more friendlier for slightly more greenfield sites. But no, you can take, and the third architecture which helps is adding in knowledge graphs to your existing data ecosystem, because they are much more agile at analytics. They're agile and very good at modeling the relationships between the data without having to do ETL and stuff. So those three architectures mean that you can take a modern approach to regulatory compliance without having to rip and replace anything, but you get the benefit of data agility.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's interesting. I think they've got some MarkLogic related questions that are coming in.
Oh, I'll have a look at that. Hold on.
So, but yeah, it is interesting to see, like I say, I think there is that perception that there's that rip and replace.
Okay, actually,
it's more agile than that. So yeah, that's good to see.
Okay, so I'm looking at the chat now.
Okay, no worries.
So you can can MarkLogic help in setting up policies for data retention and deletion to comply with regulatory mandates?
Yes, and I think we already do with some of our customers. There's BNP Exam actually use us for that. So they've created a trader surveillance and compliance system, and they needed to be able to consolidate their communication channels, so their instant messaging, their emails, the people involved, and it was a heavy task. So before using MarkLogic, there was 35 compliance officers that had to have access, but only on their domain. The communications must be archived and searchable for 3 to 10 years, depending on the types of communications. But with their existing solution, they were only able to do text search, so they weren't able to look at and get inside the emails, the metadata, the attachments, some of the instant messaging, things like that. So they implemented the MarkLogic data hub, and they were able to not only ingest the content, the emails, but they were also able to deduplicate the attachments and instant messages in some cases. They then had, a trader and customer repository to link those exchanges between the contracts. And then a GUI provided the ability to keyword search and use a knowledge graph to see and navigate through the communication exchange. So, yeah, we've already done this with our customers, and I think we've got a strong pedigree in this area. So, yeah, I think hopefully that answers that question.
Okay. There's another one. It's not unrelated, but it is different. Okay. How does MarkLogic address data privacy regulations such as GDPR or CCPA?
Yeah, so there is a number of inbuilt features that are in the MarkLogic data platform that help with this data management / retention and access of data. So, there is user profiles that you can create to have layered access to data, and that can be down to the element level inside the document. One of my favorite examples of what we did with a customer was, I can't remember the name, but they were a medical insurer, and they were looking at getting rid of basically a lot of data because it wasn't GDPR compliant. But there was a lot of information in there that they could use to help them make business decisions going forward into the future, because it was 10, 20 years worth of documents, thousands of documents.
I think I know who you're talking about, but I think they used MarkLogic to redact the PII.
Exactly.
But actually, sometimes the PII isn't PII because it was medical data. For example, maybe one of their doctors. They're allowed to use analysis around a doctor because they had them on the payroll, right? But they clearly didn't want to have patients' names in there. So they redacted out the bad data. Well, not the bad data, but the PII data. So they couldn't be using private personal information for analytics, but actually stuck in all of those documents was a huge amount of value that didn't relate to people at all. It might have been treatments and processes and outcomes, and they carried on mining for good intelligence. I think.
And the reason they could have that confidence is because we have that. We call it government grade security. The controls that we have on the document, the security at rest, the redaction upon extraction facilities that we have that makes the data unusable unless you've got the right access privileges. Even when you extract it from the platform, means that they had the confidence then to store that data and be completely GDPR compliant going forard. So yeah, I think
the bathwater.
Yeah, I think it's a really good example of using using regulations to actually improve your business. Because that came through. They looked at it as a burden, but actually now they're able to do more with that data. But also then, like I say, the number of tools available to them in their single platform, so that they could store all of their data in there and make sure that it was covered. So yeah, I think that's a good one.
Okay. Does MarkLogic have any certifications or attestations that demonstrate its compliance with regulatory requirements?
Yeah, so as you can imagine, we deal with a lot of regulated areas, and Jeremy's covered, financial services, but there's pharma, there's healthcare, there's insurance, there's manufacturing. The list kind of goes on, and we've dealt with these over the years. The regulations that have come through. There's a great part on our website. It's just marklogic.com/trust. And you can have a look at just a handful of some of the some of the regulations and compliance things that we've used with customers, or customers have used us for. SOC 2, HIPAA, Common Criteria certification, as we mentioned, GDPR, but FedRAMP. We're able to be compliant with these and create solutions and business critical applications that are compliant with these, and we've got a long history of doing it. So yeah, check out marklogic.com/trust for that one, and you should be able to see that. I've got a question coming through from another one from the chat just here. Does MarkLogic Semaphore offer NLP capabilities? For example, parsing a list of noun phrases and suggest matches, half matches, term relations, that type of thing?
I think the simple answer is yes. It's got a very comprehensive NLP stack. We use it in a number of ways. So if you wanted to quickly classify documents, you can run it over the NLP, and it will pull out entities. There's a list of them. You can provide the list if you get in contact with your account manager, and we can go through them. Doesn't require any kind of model or anything like that, just does it. I would say the reason why we always combined the NLP stack, which is multilingual as well, so there's 20-something languages that it listens to. So if you've got multinational, some documents in Chinese and some documents in Arabic and some documents in French and some documents in English, it really doesn't mind what language it's dealing with. There are certain restrictions on which entities it can put out in different languages because, that's there. But the NLP on its own is really good at doing all of that sort of natural language parsing, entity extraction. Where we made our reputation, though, and I'm talking as the founder of the Semaphore, was in the data quality. And we really believe that data quality, particularly when you're extracting data from sources of record, and we were bringing it back to regulatory compliance, the relationship concept model, which is a semantic model, which is important in regulatory, those semantic models really help the classification process, i.e. the extraction of metadata, to be high quality, because they guide. It's like asking, every piece of AI needs whether it's a human learner or a machine learner, it needs a professor. So I always say that the models, the semantic models, are the professor that marks the paper, because you can append all this metadata to the data, which helps the NLP AI essentially to be much more accurate. An example: no NLP engine yet, when reading a short pithy thing, will say Hamilton. It may say it's a city. Doesn't know it's talking about a racing driver, right? Right. You need to look around the subject to get it to say, and so the semantic models are there to help guide the context. Oh, this is about racing cars. Oh, that must be the Lewis Hamilton. Yeah. Right. So the more semantic models are about implementing subject matter expertise into the artificial intelligence, so it's understandable by business. Yeah. But the short answer is a yes. And
are these ontologies and taxonomies available? Let's take financial services, say for instance, to be imported into Semaphore or
yeah, there are genuinely thousands of them, open source. So in financial services, the one, but there are others, but the one that comes to mind is 5.0, which is a consortium of like-minded organizations who sponsored the creation of a financial ontology. But if you're in pharmaceuticals, there's many of them. They've been at it a little longer, but SNOMED, MESH. If you're in chemicals, there's Kibo. If you're in insurance, there's an insurance equivalent. If you're in even the intelligence community, have their own ontologies, which they share amongst themselves. They don't let us have them, but they have them. They know where to get them. So I always think of those as starter packs.
Yeah, I was about to say that's going to certainly accelerate the development process.
And then the really, and it's the words I don't use very often, like ontologies and taxonomies, but to those who know what they are, these are organizing structures that allow you to define meaning. The thing is, most organizations have them, but they don't know they have them, because when you implemented your CRM system, you actually had to build a structure about how you see a customer. So you've got them, right? Yeah. When you put together your content management system, you had to drop down lists of keywords and things like that. So you squabble around your organization, and it doesn't take long, and you can very quickly assemble. And you can also use the NLP to help assemble the candidate terms. But you can quickly assemble a semantic model either from the open source world that or from your own knowledge that you've got inside your own enterprise, from your systems. And it's a bit of an assembly task, but it's not a first principle task. That's what I'd say.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this was fascinating as always, and thank you very much, Jeremy, for your time on this one. I'm looking forward to that data architectures piece. That'll be an interesting one as well. I'll sum up and close by saying that we are going to be launching soon our MarkLogic community program, which we're very excited about in our customer success team here. This is aimed at developers, engineers, architects, but everybody's welcome that's a MarkLogic fan. And this will be a hybrid event, so we'll be doing monthly virtual sessions. The aim is to meet quarterly somewhere in the world. We'll throw a pin at the world map, but it's going to be designed for you. And so if you have any comments, suggestions, then please let us know. csm@marklogic.com of what you'd like to see, how you'd like it to see it, who you'd like us to bring along to these events. And we'll do the very best that we can. We're, like I say, very excited about this, and more details hopefully in the next couple of weeks on that one. But
maybe just pull out for that summit, because if you, in this course, I started talking about some of the more modern data architectures. Yes, we're going to be talking about those at that session that you talked about. But we'll look in detail at fabrics, at meshes, at hubs, at knowledge graphs. And why they are improvements on what we've got used to, like data lakes and data warehouses. And, traditional SQL databases, rows and columns, right? It's the world always moves. Change is inevitable. Yes,
change is definitely rapid at the moment, especially with everything going on with GTP and the like. So plenty of change coming along our way. So it's definitely going to be an interesting time. Thank you very much for everybody for joining us today. Thank you, Jeremy, once again for speaking. And we look forward to speaking with you all very soon. So we'll see you later.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.